everyone, I'm Vibha Chauhan and welcome to Chauhan classes Funda Clear. So from today I'm going to start a journey of class 10th SST. You know what, that we have already completed the class 9th SST. So in this video we are going to start class 10th SST, the history and the chapter 1 of it. You know what, that in this SST we will discuss more, we will discover more and more new things. So the chapter 1 of class 10th history is the rise of nationalism in Europe. So the rise of nationalism in Europe. Now you know what, that we had discussed about the French Revolution, if you remember that, and we had already discussed about the socialism in Europe and about the Russian Revolution. But you know what, that ideas of those things led to the arising of nationalism in Europe, a kind of feeling of nationalism in Europe. So we will see how that feeling of nationalism arose in Europe during the time period of 19th century. Because if you look at the period of nationalism in Europe, then it would be the 19th century, in which there was a great idea that was spreading of nationalism all over Europe. So you could say that that was happening at that time. And if we look at some more events of nationalism, then it would be the paintings of Frederick Cyril. Now in 1848, Frederick Cyril, who was a French artist, drew 4 paintings expressing his views about the world that was made up of democratic and social republics that he called. Now you know what, that he expresses ideas that a world would be there that where all the countries are democratic and social republics, and it could be seen with the example of his first figure. Now his first image, what was that? That it was based on Statue of Liberty, on the ideas of French Revolution. As all of you know that Statue of Liberty is a kind of representative of the French Revolution, and you know more that Statue of Liberty, she is a kind of a representative of liberty in French Revolution, and on one hand she is carrying the torch of light, that is the sign of enlightenment for the liberty, and on the second hand she is carrying the charters of right of the men, of all the men. Now you have to see that of all men, not of women. So you could say that Statue of Liberty, who is a sign of liberty, a kind of representative for the French Revolution. Now that is seen in that image, and you could say that around the Statue of Liberty, you could say that Europe and America, all men, women of all age groups are there and are paying a kind of homage to Statue of Liberty. Now America and Switzerland have already passed the Statue of Liberty, because at that time they were already a nation states. Nation states also know that are a kind of nation as well as a state. So you could say that nationalism had already spread and had a very great influence in the USA and Switzerland at that time, and that's why they had already passed the Statue of Liberty, paying the homage. And after that there was France carrying its tricolor flag, that was a representative of French Revolution, and after behind it there was Germany. You know what, that Germany carrying the red, black and golden of his flag. At that time Germany was not yet, you could say not yet a kind of united nation. You know what, that people were still spread in many vernacular languages, in many differences you could say. So you could say that during that time there was not a nation like Germany. People were all separated from each other. There were many differences among them, a kind of diversity among them, and that's why a flag of all the United Nations was also a very big thing you could say. So you could say that in that figure there was France, and after that there was Germany, and behind it there were all other European countries, like all the England, Ireland and all those left countries were behind these countries. So you could say that they all were coming with their costumes, with their flags, with their symbols, and were paying a kind of homage to the Statue of Liberty. And you could say that on the earth there was a trash of all the absolutist institutions, symbols and all those items. Absolutist, you could say that all those monarchy systems. Now you know what, that all those crowns and all those things or symbols that represented the absolutist power, that is the power is in the hands of one man, was thrown like a trash bin. So you could say that that was shown in that figure, and that was a kind kind of utopian view of Frederick Zero. Utopian, as all of you know, that view that was seemed impossible during that time. Like for example, if we look at the time period of 1000 years ago, now there would be, to think of that there would be a device that from which we could connect to any other people with different countries was just like a utopian view. So you could say that this was known as a utopian view of Frederick Zero. But his ideas was of nation states, to create the world as a nation state. So you could say that during that time what happened, that in this chapter we are going to discuss about the things that are created in this image. Now we will see about the unification of Germany, unification of Italy, and although the spread of ideas of nationalism in Europe. Now you know what, that if we look at the time period 19th century of Europe, now what was happening, that there was absolutist power, and you know what, that ideas were spreading, but there were many struggles. It was not just at just one night the ideas were spread all over the Europe. There were many struggles, many leaders who sacrificed themselves, and many leaders who led the team and spread the ideas of nationalism. So what was those struggles, how were the things going on, all this we are going to discuss in this chapter. Now if we look at the nation state, what do you mean by a nation state? Now a nation state means that a united state where all the decisions are not just taken by the government but by all the people as well, not just by one person but by all the people. And if we look at the definition of what is a nation, that it would be good to look at the definition that is given by the Ernst Renan, that he was a French philosopher, and at a university he gave his lecture about what is a nation, or quasi notion. So you could say that in French it was like that, and its meaning was what is a nation. Now he described that a nation doesn't mean that all people are of same kind, that of same religion, same beliefs, same races, but the glory of the past is important. The sacrifices of the past that they did was the kind of definition of nation, that they don't have to see their other things, they have to live in a plebiscite area, you could say. That means the plebiscite was being done every day in their life, and that was a kind of definition of nation that was given by Ernst Renan in the university. He was a great philosopher, French philosopher, you could say. So you could say that all these things about the nation states, and in this chapter we are going to discuss about nationalism in Europe. So let's start our chapter with our first topic, that is the French Revolution and the idea of the nation. So the French Revolution and the idea of nation is also know that in the last class history also we have discussed in the first chapter of history about the French Revolution, and you could say that in the 19th century, around 18th and 19th century, the starting of nationalism was started from the French Revolution, as we had discussed already in the last class history about the French Revolution. But what about the ideas? As also know that in 1789 this French Revolution was started, and you may remember about Louis XVI, about the monarchy system of French Revolution that was overthrown by the citizens of France, you could say. And after that there was so much instability among the French political system. You could say that after that directory states that was all formed, and there was a kind of political instability. But after all, overall there was a French Revolution that started for the nationalism, and when that French Revolution started, the ideas also spread to the outside of France, to all over Europe, that they heard when the citizens of French Revolution, France thought about the French Revolution, they thought that nationalism should spread to all over Europe, and that's why that French Revolution ideas were spread all over the Europe during that time. Many students formed their Jacobin clubs and spread the ideas, views of nationalism abroad. And you know what, that the ideas of le citoyen that we had discussed, that means the citizen, and the idea of the patriarch or the fatherland, that was spread among the French Revolution, that was spread all over the Europe. And after after that, it was a turning point of the starting, you could say that, of ideas of nationalism. And you know what, that after that, after that, when directory was made in French Revolution in France, and when there was a political instability in France, what happened that Napoleon took over France and established a kind of monarchy. And you know what, that he conquered many of the past regions of Europe, like Holland, Switzerland, Milan, Mainz, and all those regions of Europe. But you could say that he completely destroyed the democracy and established monarchy, but still in the administrative fields he had brought a very good reform. You know what, that in administrative form, like for example, the Civil Code of 1804. Now this Civil Code of 1804 was very good, was very efficient and rational in the administrative field. And how is it so? Let's discuss it. Because this Civil Code brought that there will be equality before law and the right to property. And you know what, that peasants were freed from serfdom and all those bonded labors. So you could say that many things were removed from the country. You could say all those feudal systems, manorial systems were erased. All those state system, the general state system was also erased. So all those kind of pain to the people was erased by this Civil Code of 1804, because this brought a kind of reform in France and under the rule of Napoleon. And you know that mainly this Civil Code of 1804 is known as the Napoleon Code or the Napoleon Law. So you could say that this was brought by Napoleon in the administrative field. And after that, you could say that this was spread not just in France but all the conquered areas as well. And this was also welcomed by the people of France. But you know what, that in many conquered areas it was still not accepted. And after that, it turned into hostility. You know that areas like Mainz, Milan, Holland, Switzerland, and all those areas were like that. They were not accepting it. They were just thinking that the army of Napoleon just are hinders for them, and that's why they were not accepting it. And there it was not good at all, because those kind of things were good, but for the people of France, you could say, they were not accepted by the people of all those conquered areas. And you know what, that this French Revolution was also very important because it brought a kind of unity, of feeling of unity among all the people of France. You know that there were around 30 currencies in France, but it was turned as 2 currencies, because in just a country these many currencies were confusing the people, the citizens of France. All those weights and measures were now just one, were now just common, because it would just confuse the people. Like for example, in an area of France, the main measure was about 5 centimeter of cloth, but that 5 centimeter meant about 10 centimeter in any other area. So that confused the people a lot, and that's why all things were common now in the France. You could say that all those weights, measures, currencies were now common, and even the languages were common. Now French was accepted as the national language of France. All those vernacular languages were now discouraged or discontinued, you could say. And after Napoleon, you could say that all those things were completely banned, and all those kind of sense of unity was brought into the France, but it turned into the hostility. The enthusiasm turned into the hostility, and that's why you could say that Napoleon was defeated in the war in 1815. So you could say that was about French Revolution and the idea of nationalism. It was because of French Revolution it was brought up by the citizens of France, and you could say that it brought a kind of change, a hectic situation in all over Europe as well. Now our next topic is the making of nationalism in Europe. So the making of nationalism in Europe. Now we have seen about the French Revolution and the idea that was related to it about the nationalism. But what about the nationalism in Europe? Let's discuss about that. How the things went in the Europe all over the Europe. Now you know what, that at the time period of 18th century, as we see now the map of Europe, it is just different, completely different. You know what, that during that time there were no such things that are the nation states as present time. Like for example, Germany, Italy and Switzerland that we see as a nation state, that they never existed in that map of 18th or 19th century of Europe, because during that time there were many emperors, many dynasties that were ruling among them, upon them you could say, and thus there was a kind of so much differentiation, there was so much kind of separation among these states, you could say, among these regions. You know what, that in just a country, like for example, if you look at the Austria-Hungary Empire that was ruled by the Habsburg Empire or Habsburg dynasty, you know what, that in such a land there were different kind of diversities, there were just different type of people, there was no sense of unity at all. There were many language speaking people. You know what, that in some areas they were speaking about Magyar language, in some they were speaking in some they were speaking Italian language, and there were different parts of the Europe as well, like the parts of Austria, the parts of Hungary, the parts of Sudetenland and Bohemia as well, and some parts of Italy as well, that are Lombardy and Vienna. So you could say that these are some of the parts that were under the control of Habsburg Empire, and all the people were just different. You know what, that all people were from different ethnic groups, and all people were minding just their own business, not speaking to any other person, and no sense of unity at all, unification at all, you could say. And moreover, there was that all people spoke to different languages, had their own currency, had their own weight and measures, and that led to a very big conflict in the size of measures and weights, you could say, in size of measures, you could say. And that's why you could say that during that time there was no kind of sense of nationalism in Europe. So how did the idea of nationalism emerge in Europe? Let's discuss about that with our subtopic, that is the aristocracy and the new middle class. So the aristocracy and the new middle class. Just as I said that during that time, during the time period of 18th and 19th century, the map of the Europe was not as like as is today. So it not at all. So you could say that if you look at the map of Europe, you could say that during that time in the eastern part of Europe or the central part, some part of central and in the eastern part of Europe, in the parts of Russia, in the parts of Germany, around the parts of some parts of Italy as well, and in those parts there was a kind of more and more autocracy. You know what, that there were more and more aristocracy in those areas, and obviously those aristocracies were so much dominant to the peasants. All peasants were kind of servants to all those peasants, all those aristocracies, and those aristocracies owned very big lands, you could say, and in those lands all those peasants were working, and they were also paying feudal dues to all those aristocracies, manorial dues to all those aristocracies. So you could say that in those areas there were aristocracies, but you know what, that they were very in less number. They were less in number. There were only few of aristocracies than compared to the peasants that were in the western part of Europe. Now if you look at the western part of the Europe and some part of the center of the Europe, in the parts of Britain or England, you could say, or Ireland, you know what, that in those areas there was a sense of unity a little bit. You could say that industrialization, the process of industrialization was increasing too much in those areas. Now if we look at the industrialization, we will look more and more in the 5th chapter of this class, but you know what, that around the time period of 18th century, around the half of the 18th century, the process of industrialization had already started in the Britain, but whereas you know what, that in Germany and Italy and Switzerland, this process of industrialization was started after 19th century. So you could say that there was a very great difference between the development of the western part of the Europe and the eastern part of Europe, because in eastern part of Europe there was more and more autocracy than unity among the people. There were many divisions of all those nation states that we see today, but in the western part of Europe there was a little bit less than that compared to the eastern part, and that's why it had developed too much than compared to the other areas of Europe. And you know what, that in those areas in the western part of Europe, in Britain, in England, in Ireland, you know what, that in those areas many professionals, businessmen and industrialists were existing. You know what, that all those types of professionals, industrialists and businessmen were now living in those parts of Europe, but in the eastern part they were you could say that they never existed, and that's why it was also important to bring them on. And in that there was the main thing of the liberal, there was a main contribution of the liberal nationalists, liberal middle classes nationalists, you could say. All the idea of, you know, that emerging of nationalism in Europe was because of the liberal nationalists, liberal middle class nationalists. So our next subtopic is, what did liberal nationalism stand for? So what did liberal nationalism stand for? Now if we look at the term liberalism, now what do you mean by it? What do you mean by the liberal word? You know what, that liberal, that was, its root is from the Latin phrase, Latin word that is liber, and that means free. So liberalism or liberal meant that during that time and today as well, to be free of all the autocracy. In the French Revolution it was used by the people of France, citizens of France, and it was used for all those autocracies, to be freed from all that autocracy, all those monarchy system, and you could say that that was how it emerged. And if you look at the liberalism, you know what, that liberalism that everyone wanted, who was a thinker of nationalism, who was a spreader of nationalism feelings. So you could say that this word liberalism meant so much during that time, and it meant in every field. Like for example, in the economical field as well. Now in economical field, you know what, that they wanted liberalism from all those restrictions from the supplies of goods and services and all those kinds. They wanted liberalism in everything. Now liberalism, you know what, that because equality before law didn't mean that there will be universal adult suffrage, as we have seen in the case of French Revolution in the class 9th history chapter 1, that in the first part of political instability, you could say, in France there were all those people who were property owners had only had the right to vote, but all those women and all those men who were non-propertied, who didn't have any kind of property, didn't have any kind of right to vote as well, and all women were excluded as well. And after that only there were Jacobins that came and gave right to them all those people, all those non-propertied people as well. But after that, when Napoleon took over the France and there was Napoleon Code, then what happened was that he excluded the women from the right to vote, and the right to vote was only given to the rich person, to the rich people of France, all those who had property in their hands. So you could say that there was a great struggle for suffrage as well, universal adult suffrage as well, and that's why they needed liberalism, because they wanted right to vote for everybody. So you could say that for women and for all those non-propertied men, liberalism stand meant very much. And if you look at the economical cases, you know what, that during that time Napoleon had made a kind of 39 confederation of German states. All those states that were German speaking were joined together by Napoleon and were known as the 39 confederation of German states, the 39 states, confederation of 39 German states. And you know what, that in those areas what was happening, that if there was many barriers of language, of weights and measures, and that often confused the businessman. If they had to travel from one place to another place, like for example Nuremberg to Frankfurt, they had to pass by 11 barriers of vernacular languages, of different cultures, traditions and customs. And because of that there was so much time consuming, because of different weight measures, because of different calculation currency, you could say. And that's why there was a group, that was union, that was found by the workers, by the businessmen, are known as jubileers, and that excluded all that weight measures, differentiation in weight measures and all that. It meant for the liberalism in the economical field. You know what, that from 39 it was decreased to 2 currency only. And you know what, that all that barriers of weight measures were also excluded, were also disappeared, were also, you could say that, vanished. So you could say that for liberalism, that is also very important term, that is the freedom of the people, freedom of thought, expression, belief and faith as well. So you could say that all stands for the liberty or liberalism, you could say. Now our next subtopic is a new conservatism after 1815. So a new conservatism after 1815. Now you know what, that Napoleon had took over France, but in 1815 he had been defeated by the great powers of Europe. That great powers are four countries mainly, that are Britain, Prussia, Austria and Russia. Now these were the four countries that defeated Napoleon and were united together. But you know what, that what happened was that when he was defeated and was killed in the battle in 1815, after that the idea of conservatism arose among the minds of all those great emperors, great powers of Europe. Now what do you mean by conservatism? Now conservatism means that a process of gradual change. Now you know what, that conservatism means that there is a modernization in the society, but taking all the traditional things, traditional customs as well. So there would be a gradual change, so all those traditional customs would not disappear and there would be a little bit modernity as well. So you could say that modernization with a little bit taste of traditional custom as well. And starting what happened, that conservatives thought that there should not be a change at all. But when they saw the Napoleonic Code, his idea of efficiency and rationality, then they thought that it was also very good for the administrative system in their countries, and that's why conservatism was introduced. That meant that there would be a change, but in a very gradual manner. You know what, that after defeating Napoleon in 1815, all these great powers of Europe met at the Vienna region, and there they pacted a treaty among these four countries. Now according to that, all those areas that was defeated by them was given to each one of them. Now you know what, that in France the rule was given to the Bourbon dynasty that was overthrown in the French Revolution, the starting of the French Revolution, if you remember about Louis XVI. So you could say that Bourbon dynasty had come back, had took back its France, and many boundaries were also set up in the France so that it would not take any countries, any more regions, because before Napoleon had took many states, many countries, many regions of Europe. So for not doing so anymore in the future, and that's why there were boundaries that were set up in the France. And after that, you know what, that monarch autocracy was spread after that, after the Treaty of Vienna. According to that, you know what, that all those countries, Prussia was given the control of Saxony, and all those countries were given the rules of different parts. Like Prussia was also given the rules of its western parts, western regions. So you know what, that its main point was to spread the autocracy, spread the power, absolutist power. And you know what, that after 1815, anyone who raised against this treaty of Vienna, or the power of absolutist, you know, that also power of autocracy, was punished badly. So you could say that all those right to freedom of press, newspapers, there was made a censorship among newspapers, poems, and all those plays, songs, poems, all those things, there was censorship among them. So all those books, magazines, and all those things were banned, you could say. Only those things that autocracy wanted was written down, was shown in those items. You could say that in those newspapers, only those things that autocracy wanted was written down. So you could say that was about the Treaty of Vienna in 1815. And after that, you know what, that it spread the ideas of autocracy, but still nonetheless there was many inspirations of French Revolution in the mind of people. There were many inspirers of French Revolution, and they became the revolutionaries in Europe. And how did so? Let's discuss about that with our next subtopic, that is the revolutionaries. So the revolutionaries, as I've said that there were many inspirers of French Revolution, and that's why many secret agencies, many secret organizations were now being made, were now being established down. And if we look at the revolutionaries, here we are going to discuss about Giuseppe Mazzini. Giuseppe Mazzini, who was an Italian revolutionary, was born in 1807 and at Genoa region of Italy. And after that, in 1824, he joined a secret agency that was about that was about a secret agency, revolutionary agency, you could say. And after that, in 1831, he was also at the age of 24. In 1831, he was arrested and was given exile after that, because he had planned a revolution. You could say that because of the revolution that took place in Liguria region. So you could say that because he was a revolutionary, the main reason for the revolution in Liguria, and that's why he was given an exile. And after that, he also found two secret agencies. One was at the young youth at Marseille, and another was a young youth at Bern, another organization at Bern, region of Italy. And in those organizations, they were like-minded people from Poland, France, Germany, Italy, and all those countries that wanted the nationalism, that wanted nation states. So you could say that all these people were like-minded that wanted nation states. And not just so, there were many other people. There were many inspirers from French Revolution as well. There were many more agencies that took action against the autocracy. And you know what, that the major right that they wanted was the freedom to press, because they wanted their freedom, liberty, you could say. So you could say that is about the nationalism, the making of nationalists in Europe. Now our next topic is the age of revolutions, 1830 to 1848. So the age of revolutions between 1830 to 1848. You know what, that age, you could say, in these 18 years, there was a very this period was known as the age of revolutions. And because there were so many revolutions that took place during that time, many nationalists and liberalists came up together and forced all the autocracy to be overthrown. You know what, that in Ottoman Empire, in Germany, in France, in Italy, all those revolutionaries were uprising now. Like for example, if you look at the case, the first upheaval that took place was in France in 1830. You know what, that in 1830 what happened was that the Bourbon dynasty was overthrown by, you could say that had restored in 1815, was overthrown by the nationalists and liberalists that had come together. And now at the head of, the head of the France was made the Louis Philippe. For Louis Philippe, who was a leader of all that uprising, now has become the head of France. So you could say that all those democratic rights were now given to the people after that uprising. So you could say that for a democratic country, for a social republic, now many uprisings were uprising. You know what, that Metternich once said that. Metternich, who was a Duke Chancellor of Prussia. Now you know what, that at the Treaty of Vienna, he was a mediator, you could say. So all that treaty was done under the Duke Chancellor Metternich. And so you could say that this Metternich once said that when France reaches, all Europe catches cold. That means that whenever there is a flame that occurs in France, all that fire is spread all over Europe. All that goes over Europe. And that's why after that, there were many uprisings that could be seen in the different parts of Europe. Like for example, the Greek War of Independence. You know what, that many people were now supporting the Greek War of Independence. During from the 15th century, Greece was under the control of Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire, you could say that the region of Turkey and all those neighboring countries. So you could say that they were under the control of Ottoman Empire, and they had always wanted their freedom. And that's why around the time period of 1821, from the time period of 1821, they now were uprising for their freedom. And they got also support. All those Greek uprisers, all those Greek revolutionaries also got support from all those Greek people that were exiled from their own country and from the Western people as well, because they had sympathies for all those Greek people because of their historic culture, tradition, all that historic culture. They wanted that, and that's why they got support from many people. And that's why you could say that finally Greece was finally Greece was around 1831, the war was started about Greece and Ottoman Empire, and in 1832 Greece was declared as an independent nation with a treaty that was followed in 1832, that was known as the Treaty of Constantinople. That was a place, you could say. So after this treaty, Greece country was now an independent nation. So you could say that this period from 1830 to 1848 was a kind of an age of revolutions, the period of revolutionaries. And how this so in different aspects, let's discuss about that with our subtopic, that is the romantic imagination and national feeling. So the romantic imagination and the national feeling. So here we are going to discuss about the romanticism. Now you know what, that we have seen that for the nationalism feeling there were wars and that territorial expansion, but these means were not the only means for the spreading the ideas of nationalism, the idea of a nation state. There were other ideas of culture, that were stories, poems, dance and songs. Those all were the cultural ideas for spreading the culture of surpassed countries. So you could say that romanticism was one of the most important ideas during the period of 18th and 19th century, because during that time people were spreading their views by different ways of romanticism. Now there were many romantic artists that believed that we don't have to find a glory, a reason or scientific theory for the independence of our country, but instead they focused on the intuitions and the mystical feelings of people, the emotions of people. So you could say that there were many romantic artists that wrote poems, sung songs and did many things and the ideas of romanticism. Like for example in Germany, that the culture of Germany was totally surpassed, but for the culture of Germany, the language of Germany was brought up by many such artists. Now one of the most important artists during that time was John Gottfried Handel. Now he wrote many poems and brought up the culture of Germany. He believed that people have to find their culture by themselves, people have to bring up their culture by themselves, the language of their by themselves, and don't have to be surpassed by any other empires or any other country or nation. So you could say that was in the case of Germany, because that the language of Germany, the culture of Germany was being totally surpassed. And if you look at and there was one most important thing was of Grimm brothers. Now Grimm brothers, what, that there were two brothers who wrote their own story that they had explored by doing a tour, you could say. So they had explored, and a 33-volume dictionary was made up for the German language, and they wrote many stories and that events that they had gone through. So you could say that there were many such events that were very helpful for the people of Germany during that time through the ideas of romanticism. And similarly in the case of Poland too, what, that by the end of 18th century this Poland country that we see today was divided into many parts under such different rulers, you could say, under different empires, and what, that their language was being taken off from the schools and all everywhere, you could say, and their culture was surpassed, you could say. And that's why there was a singer, you could say, that romantic artist, that was Karol Krupski. So you could say that he had a very good role in the bringing up the culture of Poland. And what, that after seeing him, when the language of Poland, the Polish language was being kicked out from the schools, now all clergy people were using the Polish language in their ceremonies, in their church prayers, you could say. Now you could say that many bishops, many fathers, many saints of churches were now being imprisoned by the rule of Prussia. So you could say that whenever there were movements of romanticism as well, the romantic imagination and their national feeling, because not just their culture, they were also spreading the ideas of modernization, because those people who were illiterate, so those people who were illiterate, they wanted symbols or songs. Through songs they could understand it in a very good way. So you could say that this is about the romantic imagination and it's related to the national feeling. Now our next subtopic is hunger, hardship and popular revolt. So hunger, hardship and popular revolt. So you know what, that by 1830s all over Europe a situation could be seen that was of great depression, great economic depression you could say. Now the same situation happened after a century. In 1930 also the same situation happened of a great economic depression, and we are talking about 1830 here. You know what, that in 1830 there were you could say that a very great economic depression all over Europe, because there were more and more population ever growing and there were less employment in Europe. You know what, that there were more and more job seekers than employment. So you could say that one of the biggest anxiety during that time was of unemployment. So you could say that during that time there was a kind of economical crisis and subsistence crisis as well, and that's why you could say that many people were facing trouble, crisis due to it. Like for example, in Europe, in many eastern countries, what was happening that many small producers had to shut down. Their business was collapsed because of the producers who were coming from Britain. Because from Britain there were cheap prices. There were cheap prices of goods that were machine made, and that's why people were buying more and people were buying the machine made goods, the cheap machine made goods. That brought a very good crisis, a very great crisis in Europe. And in any year, if there was a kind of less agriculture production, then there will be more and more hunger for the people and hyperinflation as well. The prices of goods were ever increasing. They were so much increasing that a normal person could not afford it anymore. So you could say that hunger, hardship, and that led to a revolt. Now what happened that around the year of 1848. Now 1848 was such a year because all those people, were suffering from hunger because there was less agriculture production and the prices were ever increasing. They were suffering from hunger, they had to do hardship because of unemployment, and that led to a popular revolt in 1848. Now many people marched from Paris towards Paris, and after that they did a revolt, and Louis Philippe had to flee from France, and after that a National Assembly proclaimed itself as a republic, as the ruler republic of France, and it granted the universal male adult suffrage to all men above 21 years, and you know what, that the right to work as well. So you could say that after Louis Philippe was defeated or was took on, had to flee from France, and after that a National Assembly had overthrown as a republic of France and had granted the rights of universal adult male suffrage, not to women, you have to remember that. And you could say that is about the popular revolt of 1848, because you know what, that the time period of 1830 to 1848 was really a very great depression for all over Europe, because you could see that many people were suffering from hunger, many people were suffering from being surpassed by their rulers, and so much feudal dues they had to pay. And that's why in 1848 finally a rule was made newly, you could say. There was a new rule that was made in Paris, in France, all over. And if you look at the condition of 1848, it was not that just in 1848 there was a popular revolt. In 1845 as well, when there were many workers' union, that many workers went to their contractor who was just giving them work, and was not paying the wages that much. And that's why you could say that all workers went to his manor, and there they went, and that contractor had to flee. But after 24 hours he came with the support of army, and that's why 11 workers were shot down. So you could say that there were many cases of revolt during the time period of 1830 to 1848, and one such popular revolt was of 1848 in Paris, in which Louis Philippe had to flee down, and a National Assembly was proclaimed as the Republic of France. So that is about the hunger of people, the hardship of people, and the popular revolt by the people. Now our next subtopic is 1848, the revolution of the liberals. So 1848, the revolution of the liberals. Now in 1848, you know what, that different revolutions of liberals could be seen in different parts of Europe, because now people were asking for constitutionalism. They wanted their constitution by which every person, every government had to abide by, and now they were asking for national unification as well. All men and women were demanding for constitutionalism. That is, they wanted their own constitution, laws, rights, democratic rights, you could say. So you could say that during that time many people were uprising now, and that's why in 1848 many such revolutions could be seen. Like for example in Germany. Now in Germany what happened, that many people in the region of Frankfurt made their own assembly of 831 people. Now those 831 people were considered as a national assembly of Germany, and then they made the constitution of Germany by themselves. They went to the church in Frankfurt, that was St. Paul's Church, and at there they made their vows and the prayers and made the constitution of the Germany. So you could say that National Assembly was formed for Germany, and a constitution was also formed for Germany by which the ruler had to abide by. But when the deputies offered the crown to the King of Prussia, the King of Prussia, that was Wilhelm XIV. Now this for Frederick Wilhelm XIV, who was the King of Prussia, was outraged because of this. Now he didn't want any kind of national assembly in Germany or kind of unification in Germany, constitution in Germany, and that's why he took his support. He declared a war against Germany and surpassed all those national members, all those national assembly by themselves. So you could say that all those national assembly had to disband because of the power of King of Prussia. The King of Prussia had taken support from many other monarchs, and that's why all those uprisings were suppressed by the King of Prussia. Because you know what, they thought that if there is a flame in Germany, people are asking for their constitution, then it will spread to other parts as well. Because you know that anything that suppresses, anything that uprises in France also has effect in all over world. When France stages, all of Europe catches cold, you could say. So you could say that in 1848, Louis Philippe had to flee, and that's why Germany people were also inspired by it. So you could say that happened in France, and after that it happened in Germany. Now those uprisings in France in the February month of 1848 and the July as well. So you could say that those all were the things that were happening in 1848, the revolutions of liberals, for the liberalism in the country. Now next was of controversial condition of women as well. Now we have seen all through the chapter about the men, only men, but what about the women? Now they were also forming many clubs. You know that many unions and clubs of women were also being formed, but in the vision of all other people, all other liberalists and nationalists, they were not seeing women as a companion. They were seeing that they were just made for the domestic cause, and that's why they were not supported that much by the local people. Now many clubs were being formed of women, many journals were started for women but were not supported that much, and one such woman was Otto von Peters, who started her own journal for women and raised the issues that were against women. So you could say that women were also supporting, women also wanted their liberalism and the right to vote, but were not given that much. They had a very long struggle for the suffrage movement, and after that you have seen that this was all happening, and when the Constitution of Germany was made, they were not even allowed to enter the church in which they were sitting down. They were only allowed to observe the church from a distance, you could say, from a far distance. And after that, when this all was happening, the monarchs also saw it. Now they saw that the movements of liberals was ever increasing, and it was very hard to surpass them now, and that's why a little bit freedom was was given by the monarchs to their people. Like for example, the Habsburg Empire and the Russians had now freed their people from serfdom and the bonded labor. Now serfdom, as all of you know, that serfdom means that when there is a nobleman, aristocracy, he has a very lot of land and is using all the peasants to work in his field without giving them that much payment. So you could say that is the condition of serfdom and bonded labor, as all of you know that. So you could say that this was erased and the Habsburg Empire was giving a little bit more and more autonomy to the people of Hungarians in 1867. So you could say that all this was happening during a time period of revolution of liberals. In 1848, after 1848, the situation changed very much in all over Europe, because you could say that after that a little bit monarchs were also giving a little bit freedom to their people, because they saw that there was a need of gradual change as well. And that is, you could say that about the change after 1848, the revolutions that took place in 1848. Now our next topic is the making of Germany and Italy. So the making of Germany and Italy. Now we have seen about that there were revolutions after 1848, but after that what happened, that that people were asking for national unification as well, and most important unification was of Germany and Italy, because they were asking for their unification, and there was a strange case in Britain as well. So what were those things? Let us discuss about it with our subtopic, that is Germany, can the army be the architect of a nation? So for Germany, can the army be the architect of a nation? Now if you look at the unification of Germany, as you have seen that there was a national assembly that was being formed but was surpassed by the King of Prussia, and after that what happened was that the unification of Germany was taken by the King of Prussia, William I. Now earlier the King of Prussia was Frederick Wilhelm XIV, but now the king is William I, who took over him about the unification of Germany. Now you could say that all unification of Germany was done by the chief minister of Prussia, that was Otto I Bismarck. And if you look at the unification of Germany, then the main support, you could say the main role over the unification of Germany was of Otto I Bismarck. Now what happened was that with three wars over 7 years with Denmark, France and Austria, the Prussia had fought these 3 wars and had defeated all those countries and have unified Germany totally. So you could say that in 1871 Germany was totally unified, and King of Prussia, that was William I, was declared as the King of Germany as well. So you could say that at the Palace of Versailles this was done. You know that at Palace of Versailles all this giving the rule of Germany was done to the King of Prussia, and in that Palace of Versailles, in the hall there were many members like Otto I Bismarck, the King of Prussia, and all those commanders of generals. You could say that for the unification of Germany, the main role was of army as well. If that army hadn't defeated all those 3 countries, then would Germany be unified? No, it wouldn't be. So you could say that the army can be an architect for the unification of a nation as well. So you could say that is about the unification of Germany. Now what happened overall in Germany was that when Germany was unified completely, now people were seeing the Prussia as their role of model. Now they saw that because of them they were unified, their languages unified, and controls, measures, weights were unified, and they were seeing that it was easy for them also. So you could say that they were seeing the King of Prussia, the Prussia country, as their role of model because they had unified them. And if you look at the date in which this King of Prussia, William I, was declared as the King of Germany, then it would be in the January month. In 18th January 1871 he was declared as the King of Germany completely, officially and completely. So that is about the unification of Germany. Now our next subtopic is Italy unified. So Italy unified. Now if you look at the case of Italy, now you know what, that in Italy there was a kind of too much political fragmentation. It had a very long history of political fragmentation. As we had already discussed about Giuseppe Mazzini, was born in 1804, was also planning for a revolution in 1824 in Liguria region, but was arrested and was given exile. Now he had formed two secret organizations that were, first was Young Youth in Marseille, and second was that Young Europe in Bern. Now what happened that he had two times failure. He had failure two times, in 1824 and in 1831, about the revolutions in Italy. And that's why the king of Italy, because you know that Italy earlier was so much, you could say that was so much conflicted, was so much controversial. Today we see Italy as a whole country, but earlier that Italy was divided into 7 parts under the rule of 7 empires, of different empires, and only one of them, that was Sadrina Piedmont, was under the control of Italian prince house. So you could say that this country Italy was divided into 7 parts under the rule of different empires. Like for example, the northern part of Italy was under the control of Austrian Empire, and the middle part, the central part of Italy, was under the control of Pope Empire, and the southern part of the country was under the rule of the Bourbon dynasties of Spain. So you could say that all different parts of Italy was under the control of different empires, and only one of them was under the control of Italian princely house, and the king of that area, if you look at the king of Italy, then it would be Victor Emmanuel II. So Victor Emmanuel II was a king of Italy, not just whole Italy, but just one part of it. Now he thought that with such failures of Giuseppe Mazzini, he thought that he had to unify Italy, because if he had unified Italy, then he was seeing that there would be more and more economical development and political power as well. Just think about it, if the country is unified, then there will be more and more development of the country as well, but the condition was too much worse. You know what, that till then there was no Italian language completely as well. Now Italian language has so many dialects in local regions, and that's why there was no unity among the people of Italy at all, and that's why the chief minister of of this king of Italy, that was Cavour. Now Cavour was neither Democrat nor a revolutionary. He had no idea of Italy. Like all other Italian middle class elite, he was just like he knew French better than he knew Italian. So you could say that he had a very good knowledge of French language than compared to that of Italian, his own mother tongue. So you could say that he was just following the orders of the king by his greed, because if he had done that, he would be given rewards. So you could say that he was responsible for the unification of Italy. Now in 1859, you could say that he defeated the forces of Austria, and after that in 1860 he was joined by the forces of Giuseppe Garibaldi. Now Giuseppe Garibaldi was made responsible, you could say that was most responsible person for the unification of Italy, because you know what, that because he had a lot of local support by the people about the liberalism and nationalism. So you could say that he had a very long support, too much support by the local people, and he could provide a very good army to the king of Italy, and that's why in 1861 Italy was unified completely, and in 1861 this king, that was Victor Emmanuel II, was declared as the king of unified Italy in 1861. So you could say that he had become the king of unified Italy, and now Italy had unified itself. Now the unification of Italy was done, but you know what, that in ground reality people had no idea what was going on. Now they didn't, all those illiterate people, because during that time there was so much illiterate people in the country of Italy, and what happened that people didn't know what the idea of liberalism was, what the idea of nationalism was, and what the word Italia meant. So you could say that all those things were going on in Italy. Although this king Victor Emmanuel II had been the king of unified Italy, but in the ground reality most of the people were illiterate who didn't know what was going on. Now our next subtopic is the strange case of Britain. So the strange case of Britain. Now you know what, and many scholars have argued about this nation state, this Britain. Now they have argued that in the time period of 18th and 19th century, if there was only one nation state, that would be Britain. Now if you look at the case of Britain, now you will see that the case of Britain is so weird, is so strange to be looked upon. Now its story is too much, you could say a very in a different condition, in a different direction. Now you know what, that the unification of Britain, the case of Britain is not by any independent war or revolution, but by a gradual process. You know what, that during the time period of 18th century, there was no country like Britain. Now in Britain, in that area, you could say that in that United Kingdom area, there were people, there were ethnic groups, ethnic classifications of the people like English, Welsh, Scottish, Catholics and Protestants. So you could say that in Britain there were many ethnic groups like English, like Welsh, like Scottish, Catholics and Protestants. But English was gaining more and more power. As also know that English people had made their colonies all over world, in many countries, in many parts all over world, and they were having more and more influence of their language too. As also know that during that time English language was gaining too much influence. Even today, if you look at today's situation, if you look at English language, it is creating a very good impression in our country. And you know that a very you could say that every person needs to speak English if they are looking for a job. So you could say that English language during that time was gaining too much influence, and that's why in 1688 what happened was that the English Parliament had took over monarchy. Now the monarchy of England was under the control of English Parliament now, and in 1707 the Act of Union was signed between England and Scotland. That meant that they were now a union, and together they were called as the United Kingdom of Great Britain. So you could say that now this England and Scotland together have become the United Kingdom of Great Britain. But after that, what was happening was that in this union, Scotland was being surpassed now, because English people had too much influence, had too much power, because all the industrialization, all the business was being done by the English people, because they had too much colonies in the world, and that's why Scotland was losing its favor. Now what was happening, that Scottish people were not allowed to speak their language that was their mother tongue Gaelic language, and they were not allowed to wear their national costumes or national dresses, their regional costumes. So they were not allowed to do their regional things as well as their country things, you could say that their nation things, and that's why you could say that it was being surpassed by the English people. And Ireland was also one such country. Now Ireland, that is also disputed land in this United Kingdom. Now what happened was that in Ireland there were two ethnic groups, that were Catholics and Protestants. Now English people were supporting Protestants to overthrow all the Catholic people, and after that what happened, that in you could say that there were also revolutions that took place in 1824 and in 1831, but they were all surpassed by the English people. And after that, finally in 1801, you know that in 1724 and in 1731 there were many revolutions that took place, but finally in 1801 this part of Ireland was under the control of, you could say that it had signed the Act of Union that was already signed by the Scotland and England. So you could say that a union was formed between these three countries, that was Scotland, Ireland and England. But in actual what was happening, that England had gained so much power, and that's why you could say that and all those countries had been surpassed by English people. Now what happened was that in this union only the national flag of England, that is Union Jack, and the national anthem of Union, a national anthem that is of Britain, England, that is the God Save Our Noble King, and the national language, that is English, only survived in this union, because all the language of Ireland and Scotland was surpassed by them. So you could say that this was made, the Act of Union was made, under which you could say that the United Kingdom of Great Britain was made. And in that, now many students get confused that what is Britain, what is England, what is the difference between Britain, England and United Kingdom. Now Britain, you could say that England is just a country, and together they are called as the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And so that's, you could say that, a strange case of Britain. Now we have looked at the case of Britain. Now we have seen that you could say that there were more and more gradual processes that took place in Britain that could form it as a United Kingdom, you could say, United Kingdom of Great Britain, and that's the story of Britain. Now we have looked at the unification of Germany and Italy. Now the case of Britain is totally different, and that's why we see that in western part of Europe there was more and more process of development, because those development that were taking place in the Eastern Europe in 18th and 19th century was already been developed in the western part of Europe earlier than that. So you could say that that is the case of Britain. Now our next topic is visualizing the nation. So visualizing the nation. Now till now we have discussed about the independent wars, we have discussed about the unification, about nationalism. But you know what, that in these wars, in these countries, all that rulers, chief ministers, all those kings have been portrayed. There is the image paintings of those great rulers, and you could say all of those great kings. But what about the nation? Can there be a picture of nation as well? Can there be a face of nation as well? Yes, there can be. Now in Europe, what was happening was that now face was given to country as well, and this also started from France. As I've already said that in France, it was the most influential country, you could say, because in this country, firstly, allegory was made. Allegory, that means the face of the country, and mostly it is the face of a woman, and a name is given to that woman. But that name and that face is just a fiction. It is not that there was a real woman, and by that a country's allegory is made. So you could say that a face is given to visualize the nation, and if you look at the visual of the nation France, then it would be the Marianne. Now Marianne is, you could say, that is the face of this nation, and you could say that all those national symbols of France she is wearing. As we had already discussed in the class 9th history chapter 1 about the French Revolution, and in that you saw many symbols of liberty, fraternity, justice and equality. So all those symbols are shown in this picture of the nation, and you know that this picture is stamped on coins and in pillars in national things of France. So you could say that that was being done in the Europe during the time period of 19th century, and you could say that the face was given to the country, because country could have a face as well. And if you look at similarly in Germany too, in Germany there was Germania. Now Germania, that was the face of Germany, you could say, and she was also wearing the national symbols of Germany. Now she was showing the signs of heroism, all those things. She is wearing oak leaf hat, that means that is a symbol of heroism, and she is also wearing a breastplate with eagle sign. Now that means that is a sign of strength of their country, of Germany, that is showing their country. And there is also a flag of Germany that is red, that you already know about, red, that red, black and golden. And there are many signs, like she is holding a sword, that means that they are always ready to fight for their protection, and in that sword there is a covering of oak leaf branches, that means that is a sign of peace in Germany. And there are rising rays of sun as well, that means that a new modern era. So all those signs are shown in this picture of Germania. So you could say that all those countries have their own face, have their own visual to visualize a nation, because country can be portrayed as well, and those signs are shown everywhere in Germany, you could say, were being shown in everywhere in Germany, in Europe, you could say. So in France there was Marianne, and in Germany there was Germania, and it was showing that it was only by the female figures, you could say, only you could say that female figures were shown as a visual of the nation. And in many other countries as well, there were many nations, there were many faces that were being drawn for their country. So that is about the visualizing the nation, how we visualize the nation. Now our next and last topic of this chapter is nationalism and imperialism. So nationalism and imperialism. Now we have to connect the nationalism and imperialism. Now you know what do you mean? First of all, what do you mean by imperialism? Now imperialism is just as simple as that. What happens that imperialism means that you know what, if there is a country, it is craving for more and more power, for conquering more and more countries, and that is known as imperialism. That is, you want to conquer all countries, all over countries, and you are conquering about it. So you are spreading the imperialism. And how we connect nationalism and imperialism? Now you know what, by the end quarter of 19th century, this idea of nationalism had become just a narrow-minded idea with limited ends, because you could say that now more and more imperialism could be seen. Now more and more imperialism could be seen. Now the main reason for the fall of the ideas of nationalism was intolerance between the people. Now what was happening, that all those nationalists and liberalists could not tolerate each other, had become intolerant of each other, and were now always ready to were always ready to fight over each other, and that was being done, and that's why the idea of nationalist was falling down, and that's why there were many hectic situations that were created in Europe. You know what, that in Europe, what was happening by the end of 19th century compared to that of starting of the 19th century, there was a lot of change. Now this nationalist idea had made a very hectic situation, hassle situation in this Europe, because you know that there was this most tension of nationalists was the region of Balkans. Now Balkans was the region under the control of Ottoman Empire, and now Balkan consists of regions that we see today in geographical maps, that are Bulgaria, Albania, Croatia, Macedonia, Greece, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and all those countries. So these were the countries that were coming under the area of Balkans and were under the rule of Ottoman Empire. But now they were asking for the union, and all those peoples were from the same ethnic groups, and that's why they were calling each other as Slavs. They all were known as the Slavs. All those people of Balkan region were known as the Slavs, and all those countries, all those states of Balkans were asking for their independence by showing the proof in the history, you know, that by history that earlier they were independent, but after that there was a foreign rule over them. So you could say that all countries were now asking for their independence, and all Balkan states had become jealous of each other. Now you know what, that they are jealous of each other and were always ready to declare a war against each other. What happened was that every country, you know that not just in Balkan, all over Europe, every country was craving for almighty power. Now they wanted all the naval bases, all the naval power, and the army might as well. So they were craving for power, both army and as well as the naval might, and that's why a very big tension was created among all the countries of Europe. And definitely, if you look at the case of Balkans, now they were also jealous of each other and were fighting each other as well. And that's why independence from Ottoman Empire, that is the Turkey region and all those neighboring countries and the Balkan region. So you could say that was being done after the fall of nationalist idea, and there was series of war that led on, and finally it led to the First World War of 1914 that caused a great loss to all over world, not just Europe, because all those European countries had colonies all over world, and that affected the colonies as well. Like for example of India. Now in India, what happened, that we had a colony, you know, that we were colony of Britishers. Now those Britishers were asking for army. It is just natural that in the First World War they wanted their army, their force, and that's why all those people of India who had sacrificed themselves in the First World War were being forced to fight that war, and that is, you could say, that the loss of India as well. So all those European countries and their colonies as well, and after that USA was also joined, USA and Japan. That was a supranational, you could say that was you could say, the supranational power during that time, superpower countries during that time. So you could say that all those countries were just fighting each other in the First World War, and that created a very hectic situation. And after that, as all of you know, that there was Second World War as well. So you could say that all these series, all this tension among these countries of Europe led to the First World War, creating a very great havoc all over world. And that is, we have discussed the condition of nationalism and imperialism. So you could say that when nationalism is bounded with imperialism, there is a very, you could say, bad creation of them, and that is, we have discussed in this chapter. Now in this chapter we have seen about nationalism, we have seen about its factors, we have seen that how those countries, how the idea of nationalism spread in Europe, what were the main revolutions behind it, and there are some of the important dates that you must remember, that are in 1797 there were Napoleonic Wars. As all of you know that Napoleonic Wars, that is Napoleon were conquering more and more parts of other countries, and after that you know that in 1804 he introduced the Civil Code of 1804, and after that in 1815 there was a peace treaty at Vienna and fall of Napoleon as well, and in 1821 there was Independence War of Greece that we have already discussed, that the Independence War of Greek, you could say Greece people, and after that in 1848 there were several revolutions of middle class people, of revolutionaries, of you know that workers as well. So from middle class people to low class people, all people were doing revolutions between the time period of 1830 to 1848, and after that during the time period of 1861 you know that there was from the time period of 1848 to 1861 there was unification of Italy, and you could say that during the time period of 1848 to 1871 there was unification of Germany as well, and after that in 1905 there was a hectic situation in the Balkans region. So you could say that this was all happening all over Europe. Now we are discussing about Europe because during that time Europeans were seeing themselves just as a country, because many parts of the world were already under the control of them. So you could say that that is all we had discussed in this chapter. Now in the starting we have discussed about Napoleon, and after his Civil Code of 1804 there were bad things as well as good things in this chapter. And we have already also seen the that controversy of women, because their rights were also important that were not given to them. So that is all we have discussed. I have discussed all topics and subtopics, and this chapter is also very important from the competitive basis. You know what, that in very competitive exams and your school exams as well, many questions will be given from this chapter. So you must remember the important dates and the events such as this, because anything be connected to anything. As we have already you have to correlate it. You have to correlate this chapter with your chapters in class 9th history. So that is all we have discussed. I've discussed all topics and subtopics, and the remaining chapters of this book will be covered in the further upcoming videos. So thank you very much.